Are you Craig at all?
I'm Dan. I'm Objectively Dan. Hi, this is Truth Wanted. This is my show. Craig is the guy over there. If you're watching,
I'm taking over the show. It's not my show yet. It's not my show yet, but I'm plotting behind the scenes. Who knows? I know what near-death experiences are, but I don't know any specific ones that you're talking about. You want to fill us in?
Sure. I was just talking about the neuroscience that's going on at Johns Hopkins University, where they're dosing people with a single pill of psilocybin, and they're claiming that they can induce an experience that's virtually identical to so-called mystical experiences reported throughout history in all of the major religions. And I was just wondering if you guys had heard about that stuff.
You know, I definitely have heard. I haven't heard of this specific case, but I've heard of something similar to it where people try to study near-death experiences from like a neuroscience perspective. From what I understand about trying to study near-death experiences from a neuroscience perspective is it's very, very hard, because usually when people are just coming out of a car accident, their first thing isn't to just stick them into an MRI machine. You know, usually they're trying to help them and get them better first. So I understand that the data on these kinds of, especially brain scans and stuff, are scarce, to say the least. I haven't heard any specific conclusions that say that near-death experiences are, like, real, or at least what people say they are, other than I know that people have, like, oxygen deprivation whenever they're going through some of these experiences that may cause some things that happen to them internally and may cause them to, you know, hallucinate or think that there's something there when there's really not.
Well, I think the screener kind of confused you. I mean, there is no near-death studies going on at Johns Hopkins, but they do speculate that it's not just about, you know, oxygen deprivation, that there may be endogenous release of DMT involved. I don't know if you ever heard about that.
You know, now that you're mentioning it, I probably haven't. You know, that would make sense.
Have you called these shows before?
I might have called once before.
Because there's someone who called who was talking about a similar thing, which led me to investigate perennial philosophy. Do you know what that is?
Yes, that's actually what these professionals define
that's right, what you're talking about.
And according to it.
Yes, that's exactly. I think it was you. Somebody called Tracy Harris a couple weeks back and started talking about a similar thing. And it led me to go to their YouTube channel and investigate perennial philosophy. And there's some really interesting stuff there in the correlations where they're finding, it's really cool. It's very interesting about mystical experiences that are very parallel to each other, faith to faith, from like a Buddhist mystical experience is very similar to a Christian mystic. And there's a lot of similarity.
Exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes, I thought that's what you were talking about. And psilocybin, because I personally have done, not that, but I had my first quote unquote mystical experience under the influence of psychedelia when I was in high school. But I had what I thought at the time was a mystical experience. Absolutely. And a couple of times thereafter when I did, you know, mushrooms, things like that. So yeah, I agree that they're a really, really interesting avenue of study, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be explored there fully scientifically that will lead us to new conclusions about these type of conversations. So if that's what you're saying, I'm 100% on board.
Yeah, you know, there was there was a period of time when I was in the process of deconverting, where I used the label for myself as a Christian mystic. And the reason why I used that label was because my knowledge of God, no, seriously, this is real, Craig. Don't laugh at this. This is real. I considered my experiences to be my knowledge of God at some point. Like, I thought that it was basically my proof of God was these kind of personal experiences that I had. It wasn't until later that I came to study like neuroscience and some other kinds of natural sciences that I came to the conclusion that what I was experiencing was actually naturally explained and didn't have any other kind of supernatural or otherwise components to it.
Well, even the researchers conclude that it is a completely natural experience. You know, they're not. I think I don't think, if you really examine religion at its core, I don't think it was ever about anything supernatural in the sense of defying the laws of physics. If you look at the characteristics of what they call the complete mystical experiences, because it does occur on a spectrum. So the complete mystical experience involves things like a perception that's outside of space and time. And in my opinion, I think these early mystics who wrote the scripture based on these experiences got misconstrued later, and their experiences of being outside of space and time were anthropomorphized to an entity instead of seeing it as a potential in oneself. It got anthropomorphized and abstracted to some entity that's out there, out of space and time, and instead of a potential within you.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Craig. I want to hear your thoughts.
I think that's a really interesting avenue of thought, and yes, it can be argued that. Jordan Peterson touches on stuff like this too, where God is more of a personification. It's something you use to personify these type of transcendental ideas or philosophical impulses or whatever you want to say. And if you look at perennial philosophy, if you just write it into Google, there's a whole list of texts that they think are kind of track with this type of thing, and they're from all different faiths. There's like Emerson is in there, John of the Cross. I don't even remember.
I consider myself a perennialist. I study the perennial philosophy very deeply. So I study comparative religion as a hobby.
And do you think when you have you yourself had some of these experiences that other people have been describing of like being outside of space and time?
That's the whole reason I became inspired to start researching this stuff.
Okay, so like when you have these experiences, do you believe that your consciousness or your experiences are actually outside of space and of time, or do you think that's just kind of like the feeling that you're getting?
No, I like if you look at the characteristics they use in the study, they will say that the volunteers universally express this feeling of being outside in space and time. And yes, I can attest when you're inside this experience, you have the literal impression in consciousness that there is no time. It's not like a time dilation. I brought it up to Matt Dillahunty once, and he called it a time dilation. He's like, yes, I got high before time slows down. No, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about a literal impression of your perception being outside in space and time, temporarily, of course.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be like to be outside of space and time, since all of my experiences, as far as I know, have been inside space and time.
Well, then I would say you haven't
ask a weird question.
Maybe. Well, that's interesting because my mysticism really came in more of the form of meditation and came in the more form of sola scriptura, like using the Bible as a form of meditation, also meditating on the scriptures and stuff like that. So that's what I mean when I had like my experiences. I'd never been on DMT and have had anything like you're describing.
Yeah.
When I was in high school.
Oh, go ahead.
When I was in high school, ecstasy had just come out, and we got this pharmaceutical grade ecstasy. This girl's father was a doctor, and we went to a cabin in the woods and we fasted and we took it. And I had, like, at the time, what I would describe as an extraordinarily powerful mystical experience. Looking back on it, it was just a drug experience, an intense one, but it was. So yeah, there's a very interesting line of philosophy. You're on an interesting page. I would say trying to examine it as dispassionately as humanly possible. Do you believe in God? Are you some type of a mystic yourself?
Like I said, I'm a perennialist. Because one of the key features or the core features of the mystical experience is the sense of unity with all that exists. And we're not just talking about a sense of the here and now, but you have this impression of you're one with everything that ever was and ever will be. All time collapses into the moment in this experience, and so whatever that core thing is, you can call it God, you can call it whatever you like. Lao Tzu once said, "The name that can be named is not the eternal name." But yes, I think it is synonymous with that, and I think all the major religions have had a word that point to it. Hindus call it Brahman. Buddhists call it nirvana, the Christians call it beatific vision, and so forth.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. I think it might have been you or somebody else that has called in about perennial philosophy before, and that was really the first time I had heard about it. And I did a little bit of research afterwards, but I didn't go super far into it. If someone were to want to look more into perennial philosophy, Jimmy, do you have any suggestions on that?
There's a Matheson website that I've gone to. You could also YouTube perennial philosophy. There's some interesting work online on YouTube. I also recommend there's a talk by Alan Watts called Jesus and His Religion. That's on YouTube, and the book that Aldous Huxley wrote called The Perennial Philosophy is also really good.
Cool. Well, maybe one day when I'm a bit more informed on the topic, I can talk about it a little bit more. But I mean, like, that's just opening up a gateway to like a whole bunch of other subjects here. And I do want to get to these next couple calls.